Picture this. I've been awake for 46 hours. My bloodstream is 90% caffeine and 10% pure, uncut adrenaline, and the only thing keeping my hands steady on the steering wheel is the desperate, hallucination-inducing need for my own bed. I had just touched down from an extraction op in Prague. A messy, loud affair involving a defector, a shattered stained glass window, and a high-speed chase through cobblestone streets that left my ribs feeling like they'd been used as a drum set. And all I wanted, all I prayed for to the patron saint of tired spies, was silence. Just silence, a hot shower to scrub the smell of jet fuel and old fear off my skin, and maybe a week of sleeping until noon. But as I turned the corner into Oakwood Estates, steering my beat-up sedan past the manicured hedges and the aggressively cheerful mailboxes, the hairs on the back of my neck, which had finally started to lie flat after Prague, stood straight up again. It wasn't obvious at first, just the kind of subtle wrongness that you only notice when you've spent a career looking for things that don't belong, like the way my lawn, usually a point of pride for me, because I pay a fortune to keep it looking like a botanical garden, was slightly overgrown, wilder than I left it 2 weeks ago. But the real gut punch was the front door. My welcome mat, a vintage piece that said, "Come back with a warrant," was gone, replaced by a stiff, soulless beige rectangle that read, "Compliance is community," which is the kind of slogan that sounds nice until you realize it's actually a threat. I jammed my key into the lock, ready to collapse inside, but the key didn't turn. I jiggled it, pulled it back, tried the finesse method, but nothing happened. The tumbler was dead solid. And that's when I saw the neon sticker plastered right over the deadbolt, screaming in bright orange. Property access suspended by order of the Oakwood Community Association, OCA, Code 44B. My brain, sluggish from sleep deprivation, suddenly snapped into combat mode, the kind of cold clarity where the world slows down, because this wasn't just a lockout, this was a seizure. I looked around the street, scanning for eyes, for movement, catching a twitch in the curtains of the house across the street, Mrs. Gable's place, and realized I was exposed. Fine, I thought, if we're playing games, let's play. I knelt down, pretending to tie my boot, and slid a tension wrench and a rake pick out of the hidden compartment in my heel, tools that have gotten me into heavy-guarded embassies, so a suburban deadbolt lasted exactly 4 seconds before it clicked in surrender. I pushed the door open, stepped into the cool sanctuary of my hallway, and that's when the shrieking started, a high-pitched, indignant wail coming from the sidewalk behind me. "You cannot do that. That is a sealed premises. You are in direct violation." I turned slowly, fighting the urge to reach for the sidearm I wasn't wearing, and saw her, Brenda. She was standing there in a floral blouse that cost more than my car, vibrating with the kind of self-righteous fury that usually ends with someone asking to speak to a manager. Her face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. I didn't say a word, didn't even blink, just gave her the 1,000-yard stare I usually reserve for interrogations, stepped inside my house, and closed the door on her screaming face. But the peace didn't last, because the smell hit me instantly. Not the stale air of a closed house, but the faint, lingering scent of ozone and another man's aftershave, and I knew, right then and there, that someone had been inside while I was bleeding in Europe. I didn't unpack. Instead, I marched straight to the community center, a faux colonial building that smelled of floor wax and judgment, where Brenda was already waiting behind a mahogany desk, looking smug enough to float. "Welcome home, Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that barely covers the venom. "We assumed you'd abandon the property given your irregular hours and suspicious absences, so the board voted to designate you a risk to neighborhood cohesion, which under the new bylaws allows us to secure the dwelling." She slid a piece of paper across the desk, a temporary visitor pass for my own house, expiring in 3 days, and smiled like a shark who just tasted blood. "We need to ensure you're the right fit for Oakwood Estates." I took the pass, my mind racing, because Brenda, bless her tyrannical heart, wasn't smart enough to pull this off alone. The legal jargon, the timing of the lock change coinciding exactly with my mission going dark, the specific security risk, language, it all stank of something coordinated. I walked out, needing to clear my head, and did what any paranoid operative does. I grabbed a leash from the garage and took an invisible dog for a walk, pacing the neighborhood, scanning the perimeter with eyes that weren't looking for crabgrass, but for surveillance nests. And I found them. 2 streets over, parked under the heavy shade of an elm tree, was a gray utility van, unmarked, dusty, completely boring unless you noticed the 4 distinct antennas on the roof that were definitely not for FM radio and the faint outline of a thermal camera port on the side panel. I slowed down, pretending to check my phone, and saw the side window of the van crack open just an inch, a lens glinting in the shadows, followed by the sudden, aggressive revving of an engine as they realized they were burned. The van peeled out, tires screeching, but not before I clocked the specialized comms array on the dashboard, military grade, encrypted, the kind of tech you don't buy at Best Buy. I hurried back to my house, grabbed my bug sweeper, and ran a scan, the device screaming almost immediately as it picked up a pulsed, directional signal beaming directly from the decorative lighthouse in Brenda's front yard straight into my living room. This wasn't an HOA dispute. This was a listening post. I needed backup, so I went 3 doors down to the only house on the block that looked like it might collapse, the one belonging to Jax, a former NSA crypto analyst who lived off energy drinks and conspiracy theories. I found him in his basement, bathed in the blue light of 6 monitors, and when I told him about the van and the lighthouse, he didn't laugh. He started typing. "That's not amateur hour, Marcus," he muttered, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard like a concert pianist on speed. "That signal is hopping frequencies every 3 seconds to avoid detection. Wait." He froze, his eyes widening behind his thick glasses as a red warning banner flashed across his screens. "Someone just tried to brute force my firewall the second I pinged that lighthouse. They're tracking the trackers." The realization hit us both in the silence of that basement. We weren't just dealing with a nosy neighbor. We were dealing with a wolf in sheep's clothing, a sophisticated intelligence gathering operation using the OCA as a front to spy on federal employees living in the suburbs. "Can you trace it?" I asked, watching the code cascade down his screen. Jax grinned, a predatory expression that made him look dangerous. "Trace it? Marcus, tonight we're going to break into their mainframe and see exactly who is pulling Brenda's strings." Midnight in the suburbs is supposed to be peaceful, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant traffic, but as Jax and I crept towards the back of the OCA office, the air felt electric, heavy with the threat of discovery. Jax bypassed the electronic keypad with a handheld spoofer in under 10 seconds. Child's play for a guy who once hacked a satellite just to see if he could, and we slipped into the dark office. It looked normal at first, filing cabinets and motivational posters, but behind a door marked janitorial supplies, we found the truth. It wasn't a closet, it was a server room, rows of black towers humming with heat, monitors cycling through live feeds of our neighbors' living rooms, kitchens, and backyards. My stomach turned as I saw the feed from my own house, a camera angle that could only be coming from inside a smoke detector I hadn't checked yet. Jax plugged in, his face pale as he started pulling files. "Holy hell, Marcus, look at this," he whispered, pointing to a folder labeled Project Watchtower. Inside were dossiers, not on lawn violations, but on clearances, travel schedules, and psychological profiles of residents who worked for the Pentagon, the FBI, and the agency. And there was my file, updated with GPS logs from my car, and a note that chilled my blood. Subject: unstable post-proc. Isolate and provoke. Authorized by Director Sterling. Sterling. The name was a ghost story in the intelligence community. A former handler who went rogue and started selling secrets to the highest bidder before vanishing. He wasn't just watching us. He was harvesting us, using Brenda, who probably thought she was just keeping the neighborhood safe, as his useful idiot to collect blackmail material on active agents. "We need to burn them," Jax hissed, grabbing the encrypted drive. "We leak this right now." "No," I said, a cold plan forming in the back of my mind, the kind of plan that gets people fired or killed. "If we leak it now, Sterling disappears. We need to draw him out. We need to make Brenda so erratic, so loud, that Sterling has to show his face to control her." The psychological warfare campaign began the next morning at the community potluck. I showed up wearing the loudest Hawaiian shirt in existence, holding a bowl of store-bought potato salad, and greeted Brenda with a smile so wide it looked painful. She was handing out flyers for mandatory in-home safety audits, looking triumphant, unaware that Jax had already hacked the neighborhood drone. As she launched into her speech about compliance, the drone, instead of hovering politely, dropped out of the sky and began aggressively orbiting her head, buzzing like a giant, angry hornet, forcing her to duck and weave while the neighbors tried not to laugh. Over the next 48 hours, we dismantled her reality. Jax reprogrammed the smart sprinkler systems on the entire block to trigger solely when Brenda walked by, soaking her impeccable pantsuits 3 times in one day. We looped the camera feed so her monitors showed nothing but a peaceful, empty street while I openly moved equipment into my garage. But they hit back. I woke up on Tuesday to find my car dead, the ignition harness professionally slashed, a warning that the game had escalated from pranks to sabotage. The breaking point was the community transparency meeting that Friday. I set up a projector in my driveway, inviting the whole neighborhood for a security demonstration. Brenda arrived, flanked by 2 men in ill-fitting suits who were definitely not residents, her eyes darting around nervously. "I'd like to show you all some interesting data," I announced and hit play. But instead of security tips, the screen filled with heat maps of the illegal surveillance, anonymized logs of Brenda reporting her neighbors' private conversations, and a graph showing data being beamed to an offshore server. The crowd murmured, the tension spiking, and Brenda, panicked, lunged for the power cord, ripping it from the wall. But I had a battery backup. The show went on, revealing the depth of her betrayal to the people she claimed to protect. That night, the gray van returned, but this time it wasn't alone. A black sedan pulled up 3 houses down, and a man stepped out, tall, silver-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than my mortgage. Sterling. He was here. He walked into the OCA office where Brenda was hiding, and Jax, tapping into the internal mic, broadcast the audio to my earpiece. "You're losing control, Brenda." Sterling's voice was smooth, terrifyingly calm. "And loose ends get cut." The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just spying. They were using my house as a dead drop. The lockout was a cover to plant something or retrieve something while I was gone. I scanned the timestamp on one of the stolen server images. It was dated the night before I got back, showing men in my living room prying open my floorboards. They had hidden the payload, stolen intel from Prague, inside my own home, using me as a mule without me knowing, and now they needed to get it back before I found it. I knew I had one shot to end this, and it required baiting a trap that could easily blow up in my face. I grabbed an old Pelican case from my attic, slapping a classified, biological hazard sticker on it that I'd swiped from a training exercise years ago, and filled it with meaningless papers and a GPS tracker. I placed it conspicuously on my porch, right under the gaze of the lighthouse camera, and then I drove away in my rental, parking just around the block to watch the feed on my phone. It took less than 20 minutes. Brenda, looking disheveled and frantic, scurried up my driveway, grabbed the case with trembling hands, and practically ran back to the OCA office. She thought she was seizing contraband. She was actually signing her own warrant. Jax and I watched the hidden camera feed inside the office. Brenda threw the case onto the desk in front of Sterling, looking desperate for approval. "I got it," she panted. "I confiscated it just like you said." Sterling didn't smile. He opened the case, flipped through the junk papers, and his face went from calm to glacial. He looked at Brenda with dead eyes. "You idiot," he whispered, and then he started shredding the files, pulling a burner phone from his pocket to call in a cleaner team. He was cutting her loose. "Get out," he told her, "before I decide you're a liability." Brenda froze, her world shattering as she realized she wasn't a partner. She was a patsy. As Sterling exited the building, heading for his sedan with the swiftness of a man who knows the walls are closing in, I pulled my rental car directly across the exit of the parking lot, blocking him in. I stepped out, standing in the glare of his headlights, hands clearly visible. For a moment, there was just the hum of his engine and the heavy, humid air between us. We locked eyes through the windshield, professional to professional. He saw the setup. He saw the neighbors starting to come out of their houses, phones raised, filming everything. He calculated the odds, realized the exposure was total, and threw the car into reverse, spinning around and tearing out over the frantic curb, leaving Brenda standing alone on the sidewalk, sobbing into her hands. The fallout was swift and brutal. We uploaded everything: the server logs, the video of Sterling threatening Brenda, the illegal surveillance maps, to 3 major news outlets and a contact I had at the bureau. By morning, the story was everywhere. Suburban spy ring exposed in Oakwood. The OCA was dissolved within 24 hours. Brenda's house was listed for sale 2 days later. She vanished in the middle of the night, likely to live out her days in shame in some other zip code. Sterling is still in the wind, but his network is burned. His face is on every watch list from here to London, and he knows I'm the one who lit the match. A week later, the neighborhood was quiet, but a different kind of quiet, the kind that feels earned. I spent 3 days tearing my house apart and found them. 3 high-end listening devices and a micro drive taped to the back of my drywall, containing the stolen prog data. Sterling had used my home as a safe deposit box, counting on the HOA chaos to keep me distracted while he retrieved it. I destroyed the drive with a hammer and a blowtorch. As I stood on my porch, watching a moving truck unload boxes for the new neighbor, a woman named Elena who waved with a smile that seemed genuine, I felt the weight of it all. I had won, sure. My house was mine again. The privacy of my neighbors was restored. But as I looked at the spot where the lighthouse camera used to be, I couldn't help but wonder. We trade little pieces of our freedom every day for the promise of safety, for property values, for neighborhood cohesion. Brenda wasn't a monster. She was just a person who loved rules more than people, and that made her the perfect weapon for a monster like Sterling. It makes you ask the question, doesn't it? When we give someone the power to watch us for our own good, do we ever really know who is sitting behind the screen? I took a sip of my coffee, finally hot, finally peaceful, and watched the sun go down over Oakwood Estates. I'm keeping the locks changed. And Jax? He's keeping the drone. Just in case. But tell me what you think in the comments. Did I go too far destroying Brenda's life to get to Sterling? Or was it the only way to burn the rot out of the system? Stay vigilant, stay safe, and check your smoke detectors. You never know who's watching back.